You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and I am joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen's, how we doing?
Oh, doing good. It's SEC Media Week, so my Bulldogs took the podium today. Had to answer a bunch of questions about Georgia or about Alabama. Right? Georgia takes the podium. Everybody wants to talk about Alabama. That is what it is, because they are 1-0 in the last contest against Alabama, and that was for the Natty. So I'm still riding high on that one. And then we are a week away from training camp, guys. Like it is countdown time. Players are honing back in. We're starting to get reports of, people who have put in the work during the offseason, people who ate a bunch of donuts during the offseason, all those things. So it is glorious. Great time of year. Get into this. That way we can get past the MLB All-Star break and the boringness that is baseball at the moment. So I couldn't be happier of what's coming ahead for us. How about you guys?
I'm very excited that we are almost to football season. Appreciate you guys holding down the fort while I was gone last week. I was actually getting in the spirit of football season, playing the world's only NFL themed golf course up in Grapevine, Texas. It's a Cowboys themed golf course. And it was kind of a letdown, if we're being honest. It was so good that we're going to go back and play for free because it wasn't that great.
Ringing endorsement there.
Yeah, it was a fun course. I have a feeling when it's not, the middle of July and they sanded the greens the week before, it's probably a heck of a lot more fun. But so hopefully when we go back when my brother and I go back in the next couple months here, it'll be a lot better and I'll have a much better endorsement for that golf course. It's also, it's the Cowboys, so I got to hate on everything. Like it's just part of the process. Right. So, but it was fun. And, the fact that we are, that we're counting down, we're in days now. Like you can finally start to count it down as days and not weeks until we've got the football season. So, it's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. You're close when you start seeing teams and their social media teams starting to push out there that you're, such and such player away from actual start of season. Seeing several of those memes and several of those kind of graphics come out over the last day or so. And, one thing, Alex, you're talking about the Cowboys fans. One thing I will give Cowboys fans is they're at least not the most delusional sports franchise fandom out there. So they do have that going for them. Yeah, there's other that are certainly more delusional.
Who is more delusional? This is a fun topic. I know we've got to get to our teams and we'll get to that, but who would you say is the most delusional? Let's just keep it to NFL, but what fan base is the most delusional? Because to me, I think it is the Cowboys.
No, the Cowboys at least understand where they're at. You talk to a Giants fan, and they are always thinking that Daniel Jones is the answer. This is the year. Saquon Barkley is going to have his career year coming up all the time, even though the line is still awful. That they're going to be a 500 team. Like, trust me, I've gotten out there and I've mixed it up with a few of the fan bases out there on the social medias there, and the Giants ones certainly are the ones that tend to be the loudest as to my and protest my point of views.
It's funny because you could replace Daniel Jones with Dak Prescott. You could replace Saquon with Zeke Elliott, and it's the same thing. The line is so bad.
The Giants are better with Dak Prescott back there. I will say
that is for sure.
Dak won't fumble the ball. Dak won't fumble the ball as he goes into the huddle to thinking about the handoff that he's about to make.
Kevin, who is the most delusional fan base in your opinion?
Kansas City Chiefs.
Okay. I'd like to hear the reasoning behind this because while they were long suffering, they have been the class of the AFC for the last.
And what do they have? They have
4 or 5 years. They have a Super Bowl to show for it.
One to show for it.
Yeah,
I'd venture to say that they don't get another.
I mean, it's possible.
I don't know that Mahomes gets another, and it has nothing to do with Mahomes. But they had to pay everybody. Tyreek's gone. Travis Kelce's really long in the tooth. You have young and up and coming teams in the AFC. The AFC is such a loaded conference, right? You have arguably 10 teams in the AFC that have a legitimate chance to have a strong run into the playoffs and possibly play for a Super Bowl. I think in the NFC, there might be 3: Tampa Bay, the LA Rams, then people would say Green Bay, but that's revisionist history, right? Like, what are they going to do without Devontae Adams? Like, how's this going to look with Rodgers not having anybody?
San Francisco?
I was going to say the Niners probably are in that.
The Niners, but
you don't feel warm and fuzzy about putting them in there.
No, they're pesky, right? They play really good defense. They run the ball. Like, they're a pesky out for sure, but I don't know if I'm willing to say the Niners have enough raw talent to truly compete for a Super Bowl. Like, on the AFC side, I mean, Bills, Chiefs, Bengals.
Okay, so
Chargers,
here's what we'll do.
Broncos.
Derek, we'll put this
Ravens.
Up as a poll. You can keep going all day with these AFC teams.
Yes, let's loaded.
Then that's proving the point is what it is. Derek, let's put this up as a poll on Twitter. So you say the Giants, I say the Cowboys. Kevin's going to go with the Chiefs.
And we'll leave a fourth option
as
other.
For other, yeah. And see what we get in terms of responses. So that's fun. The most delusional fan base in the NFL. I think that's a fun little conversation. And we'll revisit this. Let's revisit it, see what the poll results are next week.
It's interesting that 2 of the teams that are on that poll come from the NFC East. Just FYI.
I could have said the Eagles and made just
that's very true.
Right?
That's very true.
Like, you could say the Eagles in place of Kansas City, and that's fine. I mean, Kansas City's just happy because they're beating Denver right now. Really, if you talk to a Kansas City fan, the Super Bowls are nice. They just like to say, well, the Broncos haven't beaten us in 4 seasons. Well, you have one more Super Bowl than the Bronco in the last 4 seasons and the same amount over the last 7. So what are we really arguing here, right?
Right. So and we'll make sure we get that one posted up there and get the responses out there. We'll I'm sure we'll rehash this conversation here in the coming weeks. Guys, we do have an absolute great show for you. We're going to hit the Cardinals, we're going to hit the Bills, and we're going to be talking fantasy options for both teams. Y'all know how we do it. We are going through the team breakdowns, hitting all of those players that are going to be some of the fantasy relevance there and some that may not, as deep as we go with these things. Any other thoughts before we start getting into the team breakdowns here?
Apparently Leonard Fournette is in the doghouse already in Tampa Bay. So for those of you who have not seen the report, reports are that Leonard Fournette showed up to camp at 260 pounds. 260 pounds. Now, he was always kind of a big, thicker back, but his playing weight has generally been somewhere between 225 and 235. He showed up, his presser to kind of, put his spin on things. He goes, no. He goes, I ain't 260. 245, right, is basically what he said. Homeboy, that you still got to drop 20. And not that these athletes can't. Like, I need to say this. They have such training regiments that once they get in, a lot of this weight does kind of slough right off, and they're able to turn kind of their athletic dad bod into a well-oiled athletic machine inside of a month. Like, they are able to do that, but it hurts for us, and I say us collectively because I know we took Fournette in the Scott Fish Bowl, Derek. So that one's we're biting our lip a little bit, hoping that comes to
to fruition. Yeah.
Fruition with fitness, right? Because we really expected him to kind of be Tom Brady's go-to here with Godwin potentially missing the first part of the season.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. You're starting to see some of those reports kind of sneak in and creep up, and it's always interesting to see some of the spins on some of these things. But, that's one of those. We'll be keeping an eye on that one as we go through this as well. We still have the Buccaneers to break down this year, so I'm sure that we'll be talking Leonard Fournette here in the coming weeks of the show. But guys, if you haven't followed us on social already, make sure you do that. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Good Old Boys FF. And do us a big favor, head over to the YouTube channel, the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button. Best way to support this independent podcast. But let's go ahead and get on into some teams and start breaking them down. We're going to start with the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals last year were 11-6, a 54% pass, 46% run ratio, ranked 11th in points for, 8th in total yards for. Head coach Cliff Kingsbury. No offensive coordinator. And we're going to start right there in the running back room where we always do. Start with James Conner, who finished running back 5 last year, 202 rush attempts, 752 yards, 15 touchdowns, 37 receptions, 39 targets, 375 yards through the air, and 3 tutties through the air. Thoughts on James Conner?
What a resurgence for James Conner, right? Like he had... was it his rookie year or his second year in Pittsburgh, right? Where he kind of, it was his rookie year, I believe, busted onto the scenes. And then the injury bug kind of crept up and bit him the next couple seasons, gets a change of scenery, going down to the desert and explodes again, right? It just absolutely explodes. We thought it was going to be a timeshare to start. I believe that we unanimously told you to go for James Conner and not Chase Edmonds last year leading up to the season. So hopefully you listened, because that probably helped propel you into at least a playoff situation. But I like James Conner. I think he's a great story, right? He's a guy that you enjoy liking and enjoy following, right? From his time in Pitt and with the cancer recovery and everything else that he's done. Like, I like James Conner as a human being. Therefore, I also like him as a fantasy asset. Now, I think that comes with some realistic expectations. I do not expect him to finish RB5 again. 15 touchdowns on the ground is going to be really hard to replicate, guys. Like, really hard. If he gets to 10, I think that is a win for him this upcoming season. But with that said, I do think his attempts go up. Right. So he had what was that, Derek? About 240 total touches.
202 rush attempts and 39 targets, caught 37 of those things. So yeah, he was at 239 total opportunities where he had the ball in his hand.
Okay. I do think we see that creep up to 275, 280, right? So, I don't know that he's going to go over that 300 touch mark, but I don't know that Arizona wants to necessarily, right? So he will be used. He's a good high energy guy. He is a great guy he's going late enough in drafts that you can kind of pick him up in the 7th or 8th round in a lot of different formats. So he's able to be your second or third running back in a lot of different cases, depending on how you're drafting and your league format. So I think I like the value there because he's going behind AJ Dillon. He's going behind Zeke. He's going just in front of Kenneth Walker, Josh Jacobs, right? So in that pocket right there, I think Conner sticks out. So I like him a lot. Obviously, he can catch out of the backfield. His pass protection's gotten better the longer he's been in the NFL. And Cliff Kingsbury obviously trusts him to put the ball in his hands inside the red zone, i.e. the 15 touchdowns. So all things kind of equal to, I am a green light on James Conner this season.
Yeah, I think when it comes to James Conner and Kevin, I agree with you. He was such a I don't want to call him a surprise, but
you had him last year on our home league, didn't you?
Yeah, and he was solid. He was so solid. And it wasn't, honestly, it was unexpected because I did think it was going to be a bit of a share down there. I didn't expect him to get 15 touchdowns. It was coming off of a year where it was an okay season, his last year in Pittsburgh, but then, expectations, what were they when they got down to Arizona? There's just so many variables that were going into last season with him. And he was very solid. And I surprise is the best word I can come up with, but it was much needed on my roster that was not very well constructed in the first place. But this was a bright spot. So really what it comes down to with James Conner is, do you think he's going to get over that 200 rush attempts? Because you look at his
yes,
his seasons, he gets above that 200 rush attempts and you're looking at double-digit touchdowns. Like that's his MO. It's only happened one other time in his career, but that was that year in 2018, which was his second year in the league, that he had 12 touchdowns with Pittsburgh. So, that 200 rush attempt number is huge for him. And I think I don't see a reason why that number would go down, obviously barring injury, but I don't see a reason why that number would go down. And so you'd have to think that if he's going to get the 200 rush attempts, while the yards weren't exactly there, he more than made up for it with the touchdowns that he was scoring. So I agree with you, Kevin. I don't think he gets to 15 touchdowns again. I don't see that happening. But that 200 rush attempts, if you think that he's going to get there, you can pretty much bet that he's going to be hovering around that 10 touchdown mark, be it, maybe one fewer or one or two more. But he's going to be hovering around 10 touchdowns if he gets to that 200 rush attempts. So he has been a very big bright spot for that Arizona offense. It helps Kyler, not have to run the football when you have somebody reliable like that, especially when you have somebody reliable like that when it gets into the red zone and, obviously the field shortens up and hits get a little bit harder when the defense doesn't have very much field to defend. So I like James Conner as well. He's definitely somebody that I'm keeping my eye on. And I hope that I can snag him in any leagues that I'm in.
Real quick, 12 and a half total touchdowns. He had 18 last year, which is a huge number, right? That's a big, big number. So we're calling for regression. 12 and a half total touchdowns.
I would tell you
Conner this season.
That's the line right there. Like
that is a great line.
That's what I'm thinking is I think you're going to see between, 12, probably actually realistically, I think you see between about 11 and 14 touchdowns is what I was getting ready to say on that one. So 12 and a half is a kind of a perfect line there. And I want to tell you that it's pretty much a push. Like I could see, it's not going to surprise me to see him finish 12, 13 touchdowns. But if you're going to make me pick either side of that, I'm probably going to take under just slightly. And I think it's going to be that hook that gets it. So 12, I could easily see him do.
Egan?
I would take I will take the over just because Arizona's receiving options for the first part of the season isn't going to be great.
And that I completely agree with that. I do. And that is why I think I just got done saying regression, but I do think it's over the 12 and a half because the first half of the season, they are without DeAndre Hopkins. And this is about the safest option that they have for consistent points, right? We know Kyler can sling it. We'll talk about the rest of the offense here very shortly. But I do think that they're going to lean on James Conner pretty heavily the first part of the season to let the offense get in sync, to kind of continue to work out who is going to be the primary receiver with DeAndre Hopkins on the sideline for the first half of the season.
Right. So, yeah, I like James Conner this year. He's coming off the board, running back 19 overall. Arizona has a tough schedule for running backs in it, though. They've got the 28th hardest. So, I mean, the 28th easiest schedule. So, you're talking the fourth hardest schedule for running backs on a strength of schedule for James Conner here. Coming off the board at running back 19. I think he outperforms running back 19 on that one in your standard redraft league, half point PPR scoring, 34th overall type of pick range is where he's going. So tail end of the third there. And that sounds about reasonable there. James Conner did not have a very efficient year last year, right? When you look at it in the past, when he had another great fantasy finish, he was efficient up there in Pittsburgh, kind of taking that Le'Veon Bell role, did a lot of work out of the backfield receiving, did a lot of work on the ground there as well, scoring touchdowns. And if you look at how Cliff Kingsbury and this Arizona Cardinals offense runs, when they get down inside the red zone, they don't want to try and run the ball outside the tackles, things like that. They like to just push it really between the two guards and really, 3 yards in a cloud of dust right there, which James Conner did an exceptional job finding the end zone last year. 18 attempts in the 5 zone, running the ball, 10 of those turning into touchdowns. So he's a guy that in 2020 we saw Kyler get 11 rushing touchdowns there. With James Conner in the backfield, we saw that number drop to 5 last year, and I think that's where you're going to see that, right? Like in 2020. Kyler put up a lot of touchdowns when he couldn't find somebody, he tucked the ball and he'd scramble in there and he'd do that. That work has since gone to James Conner, and he's doing a great job at it. While not efficient last year, running the ball, I think that you will see him get fantasy gold there from the standpoint of he'll get that, that double-digit touchdown and be fine for you in return value. I could easily see him being a top 15 running back. So I think you're going to get some value on that one. Any other thoughts on James Conner? All righty. Let's go ahead and head on in to Darrel Williams. Apparently our sheet didn't like us there, but Darrel Williams finished at running back 57 last year, 144 rush attempts, 558 yards, 6 touchdowns, 44 receptions, 53 targets, 422 yards through the air, and 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Darrel Williams?
I think those numbers look pretty good for him this year. You might see a slight uptick because it's not a 3-headed monster in Arizona running the ball. It's going to be mainly Conner and Williams. So you might see a slight uptick. I could see him pushing, in top end of running back 4 type position, but I don't see him finishing inside the 36 by any stretch. He's a guy who he can pass protect. Obviously, he's very adept to receiving the ball out of the backfield, coming out of Kansas City and playing with Mahomes. So I think that there's going to be some things that naturally translate from his time in Kansas City over to Arizona. But I do think that as it stands right now, this is a clear A and B situation. This is not a 1A and 2A. So I'm keeping an eye on him, maybe late in drafts, depending on how deep your rosters are, something like that. But I'm not actively searching him out. I think we can find secondary running backs who are in a better position in the same type of draft pockets that we could get Williams.
So I think what's important about this is that, again, new face on a new team. You got to figure out how they want to use him, and the fact that he can, receive out of the backfield, and does possess decent running ability with showing that he can take 150 carries and take some of that load off of your main guy. I like that he can catch. I like that he, in my mind, James Conner is like the first and second down back. And this may not be how they do it. They may do series on, series off type situation with these two, or 2 series on and a series off for Conner. Because they are both versatile backs that can play, 3 downs. But if this tends to go more towards James Conner on first and second down, Darrel Williams on third down, there is value there. But I think what we're going to have to pay attention to is the reports coming out of Arizona and how they plan on utilizing him, because that does really skew what I think Darrel Williams does in terms of his production and his output. So if it is more of a, series on for one guy, it's series off and it's their series, then I like Darrel Williams. If it's more of he's going to get the third down work, then yes, you're going to have to take that with a grain of salt. Could be an excellent best ball candidate just because you never know. It could go off. That's just, one of those high risk, high rewards. We know this offense is going to be high powered just because of who's running it, both who's calling the plays and who's executing said plays. But I think that, Darrel Williams, it really all depends on how Arizona plans on using him. For that reason, I'm a little more, standoffish. I'm not so bullish on taking him when it comes to draft time, but definitely somebody that, I don't know that you could consider him a handcuff, because I do think he has some standalone value. But definitely a guy that if you do end up getting James Conner, probably wouldn't hurt to be able to stash him away too.
Yeah, in my mind, he's a handcuff. That's where I'm viewing him at, and that's how I'm going to proceed with this one. He's running back 58 off the board, 177th overall draft pick. So that's putting him very late into drafts. If I've got James Conner and I'm picking him up, I'm going to spend that late round capital picking up Darrel Williams. If I don't have James Conner, I'm going to let him slide on by there. I think you will see him have some standalone, well, not necessarily standalone value. I think he will get some opportunities, week in, week out, but not enough for me to want to, use a roster spot unless I've got James Conner. James Conner, as we, say on the show, hasn't been has been a little bit health or injury health resistant. There's the words I'm looking for. Has been a little health resistant in the past there. And so if I'm going to roster James Conner, I'm going to spend a 3rd round pick on him. I'm going to pick up Darrel Williams with that, that 13th, 14th round pick there, just handcuff that thing and move on. And if I don't have him, I'm going to let him sit there. All righty, let's go ahead and head on over to the wide receiver room. DeAndre Hopkins, who will be joining the Cardinals sometime in the second half of the season. Wide receiver 42 last year, 42 receptions, 64 targets, 572 yards to the air, 8 touchdowns, 11.23% of the target share. Thoughts on DeAndre Hopkins?
He is a guy that, how do I want to phrase this? If you are patient with your roster building and can move around the waiver wire and feel confident in a lot of the extras, right? A lot of the little things to kind of help get your team in position. When DeAndre Hopkins comes back, he could be the reason you make a late push and possibly win your league. That being said, I'm not drafting him because I'm not taking that risk. He did not impress me before the injury last year. Obviously, with the suspension now, he's pushing 30. Yes, he's a great receiver, has a ton of ball skill talent. When the ball hits his hands, it does not – it seems to catch everything, right? He doesn't drop passes, anything like that. But I think I'm going to – if I'm going to take a risk, I think I'm going to do it somewhere else. As opposed to DeAndre Hopkins this year. And I will let someone else take that opportunity. Maybe they get it and then they decide that they don't want him, and you can maybe trade for him right before he comes back. Maybe someone gets mad and has to make a tough decision and cuts him from their roster because they can't wait until he gets back, and then you can spend some fab to pick him up that way. But I'm not convinced that I need to spend mid-round capital on a receiver that is only going to play half the season. And with that, he's going to have to get into football shape since he can't be around the team facility right now. So you're drafting him for a playoff push. And I don't know that I want to gamble on a guy as great as he is hitting his stride as I get into my fantasy football playoffs.
So we've talked about this a lot on this show. There is a lot of wide receiver talent out there. Like, there is a lot of wide receiver talent. Now, there isn't a lot of, quarterbacks that are able to unlock all of that potential talent. And there isn't a lot of situations where the wide receiver talent can shine because there is so much other talent on any given team. So with DeAndre Hopkins, that's, Kevin, the way that you put it is the best way to put it. He might be your savior, your white horse that you ride to a fantasy football championship, he might also just be a roster spot that if you can absorb it, then you're going to end up sitting on it for, what is it, 8 games? Is that what he got?
He's got I thought I just read it was a 6-game suspension.
6-game suspension. So, I mean, you're talking, he still gets almost 2/3 of the season now with it being an 18 game or 18 weeks. But there's so many question marks that roll into that. And I just think it's going to be tough. I like the idea of grabbing him if you are satisfied with the fact of your first 2 wide receiver picks that you make, because he's probably going to be gone. I mean, somebody's going to take a flyer on him in any league just to have that opportunity. I think that's the one thing that we all love as fantasy football is hope. And we love to hope, and we hope that everything works out the way that we hope it does. But that's what you're drafting. If you take DeAndre Hopkins, you're drafting a whole lot of hope. And I'm not sure that hope, follows through in the way that you might want it to. So I like the idea of taking him if you are really comfortable in the 2 receivers that you get before, especially if you're in a deep league, and there you've got 10 or 12 roster or 10 or 12 bench spots, then it's okay. You can absorb that. But you just know that you are going to have to spend a lot to watch him sit on your bench for the first 6 weeks of the season. And even still, it's going to take time for him to get back into the rhythm of things when he does finally come back.
Yeah, I'm going to make this real easy. I'm out on DeAndre Hopkins this year. Flat out on him. We've seen that. Kevin makes the point a lot of times soft tissue injuries as athletes get older. That was what we kept seeing pop up the last year was the hamstring to it. I'm getting Julio Jones vibes coming off of this thing where it's, it'll have a lot of name value there on that one. But at the end of the day, I think that could be a landmine in the middle rounds there for whoever ends up drafting DeAndre Hopkins. Absolutely loved watching him play. Loved, loved what he can do on the field. But just this year for fantasy, I'm not buying in. I will not be drafting DeAndre Hopkins, spending a 7th round capital on him coming off the board, wide receiver 35, because I don't know that he returns much more than that when it's all said and done this season on this one. So, yeah. We did the draft a little while ago where we did the 7th round madness draft on that one, where I went out and drafted a team with only 7th round draft capital and draft picks on that. And even with a team where I could only draft in the 7th round type of things, DeAndre Hopkins wasn't on that team. So there are other options in there. There's a lot of other talent in the 7th round that I would rather go with. And for that reason, DeAndre Hopkins will not be on my roster. With that, maybe if the room I'm in and the draft board that I'm in, he falls down to like the 10th round, I might take a stab on that one there, but I'm not going much earlier than about the 10th. So from a draft capital standpoint, I don't think that he's going to be on any of my rosters. Any other thoughts here on DeAndre? Alrighty, newly acquired Marquise Brown, wide receiver 23 last year, 91 receptions, 145 targets, 1,008 yards, 6 touchdowns, 24.66% of the target share. Thoughts on Marquise Brown?
I think we see a slight uptick in these numbers, and not a massive uptick, but I do think we see a slight uptick. So obviously there's chemistry there, right? Kyler and Hollywood Brown did play together at Oklahoma. So there's some natural chemistry there from their time together that I do think they're going to be able to kind of reignite here at the NFL level. Obviously, we just talked about Hopkins, who is out for the first 6 weeks. So there are a couple different things that are playing well into his factor. I like him as kind of a third wide receiver, maybe a flex type. But anything earlier than that, and I think I'm going to stick away from just a bit because there's so much boom bust potential within this. Great pick for best ball. great pick for best ball. For season long, it's not that I won't do it, but I'm going to have to kind of really like how my roster's set up to take that chance, as opposed to spending my flyer somewhere else. But I like him. Kid's got a ton of talent.
I like him because he's going to an offense that I don't want to say prioritizes throwing the football, but at least allows isn't the best word either, but throwing the football, there's an emphasis on it. That's probably the best way to say it. And now I know that Arizona ran the football. They were whatever we saw there, that was 58. What was it, Derek? 52 run pass.
Yeah, it was fairly balanced on that one. And it was a 54% pass, 46% run ratio.
See, so they're passing more than running. And that's even with, Kyler scrambling those plays going in as run plays. So I like the fact that he's going to a pass emphasis offense, which we haven't really seen him be in his career yet. I like that he does have the chemistry. I like the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is out for the first 6 weeks, suspended for the first 6 weeks. But here's, I actually like him after DeAndre Hopkins comes back, because I think that teams will be distracted by DeAndre Hopkins, and that's where Hollywood Brown probably makes more of his hay. So I think that we see, I think he has good production in the first 6 weeks. I think his production probably goes up, game over game in the final 10 or 11 weeks of the season, just because the defenses will have more to worry about. There are stressors out there. But I also like I like Hollywood Brown. I like him a lot more than I ever did when he was in Baltimore. And I know that is going to pain my co-host to hear, but he's a realist as well, despite the fact that Hollywood's one of his guys. It was tough. It was hard to watch him in that offense there in Baltimore.
Yes, it was, right? Like, so a couple of things that are really kind of interesting to look at there, right? Like Marquise had a really good year last year. It was filled with a bunch of boom bust type of deal, but he was from a target share percentage, he had one of the best target shares of a wide receiver in the league, and it only resulted in wide receiver 23 category or finish for him. So there's going to be some of that while he had a really good target share last year in Baltimore, I think he does have a really good target share here in Arizona as well. I think that DeAndre Hopkins being out 6 weeks will help fuel that, especially to start with. Kevin brought up the fact that Kyler and Marquise played together at Oklahoma, and their last season there together back in 2018, he saw about 27% of the target share, when those two played together as well. So chemistry's there. Absolutely. He's a guy that Kyler looks to and looks for in when they play together. And there is something to be said about a speedy guy that can play wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins' absence on this offense, right? You look at Christian Kirk last year, who during the last couple of weeks that DeAndre Hopkins was out, I've got it here, wide receiver, 11.5 point PPR scoring in weeks 15 through 17. So you're talking a top 12 wide receiver during the playoff push there. And those were all weeks that DeAndre Hopkins ended up missing there. So there's certainly upside there. And I'm building the case there for, kind of why Marquise Hollywood Brown. But on the flip side, it's going to be hard for me to necessarily draft that, because he is boom bust type of potential. Where you've typically seen him have really great fantasy games in the past is he catches one and he houses one. He puts up a 30, 40, 50 yard plus touchdown on a single play, and that ends up carrying him on the day on that one, leading to some more of that boom bust. Wide receiver 23 off the board there. I think that's about what you're going to be looking at for an overall finish on this one. But there's other wide receivers going right and around that same area of the draft that I think I would rather go with. So as much as it pains me to say, I'm probably not going to walk away from many drafts with Marquise Brown on my roster. Looking at it, I've got guys like Cortland Sutton, Allen Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all of those guys going slightly after him in drafts. And I think I would pretty much go that way on every one of those things. Arizona strength of schedule, this one is a rough matchup there. So, like I said, pains me to say it, but I don't know that I'm going to see Marquise Hollywood Brown on many of my rosters this year. Let's go ahead and head on over into the next wide receiver here. AJ Green finished wide receiver 40 last year, 54 receptions, 92 targets, 848 yards, 3 touchdowns, 14% of the target share. Thoughts on AJ Green?
I wonder if he remembered to run the right route. Which pains me. He's a dog, right? Like I'm giving him a hard time. So he's in the limelight of his career. Now, he's a great possession receiver still, guys. Like he will serve as that purpose. He can get off press coverage a little bit, not nearly as well as what he could a couple years ago, but he is still extremely talented down the sideline. So I think a lot of it is how well he can continue to build a rapport with Kyler this offseason. I don't think he's going to, step up and ascend into this great wide receiver one type player. But I think in deep leagues, he can serve his purpose as like a 5th wide receiver or a 6th wide receiver on your roster. Like you're playing him and you're drafting him for the reason it's a high octane offense. They like to pass the ball. They run a lot of plays per game, and it's something for injuries. It's for bye weeks. It's if he gets on a heater a little bit, right, and you kind of need to gamble, you can play him as, depending on the matchup, more of an upside type play. But generally speaking, AJ Green's not a guy I'm drafting, right? Like, I'm not going to chase the guy he was 5 years ago. I'm just not going to do it. And while the value is there late in drafts and everything else, I think I'm more inclined to take a swing on one of these rookie receivers and see if the back half of the season, when things kind of start to click for a lot of these rookies, if I can catch lightning in a bottle, right? And maybe get off the block and you kind of bury this rookie receiver, whoever it is, and then boom, back half of the season, he's putting up, back in wide receiver 2 type numbers because he's ascending in an offense and he kind of catches his stride to put you down the home stretch.
So last year, he averaged 15.7 yards per reception. That's the 5th time in his career that he's averaged over 15 yards per reception. The only time that he has put up more yards per reception in his career than he did last year was his rookie year in 2011. He had 16.3. I say all that to say this. This is Larry Fitzgerald 2.0 in my opinion. So I don't think that, AJ Green, while he is serviceable, and Fitzgerald was serviceable right until the last couple of years where it was, should he retire? Are they just doing him a favor is he just providing a grown-up's voice in the room? But to me, AJ Green is Larry Fitzgerald, 2.0. So I am not looking at AJ Green. He could be good the first 6 weeks, but I mean, I think the second that DeAndre Hopkins comes back, his production and how much he is seeing of the football is going to go pretty far down when you throw in the addition of Hollywood Brown in there.
So there's a case to be made that AJ Green actually sees more touchdowns this year, similar yards, all of that kind of stuff. Because when you look at it, last year really wasn't much of an outlier when it came to his statistical output, right? We've seen several seasons in the past with similar catch rate, similar yards per reception, just not necessarily some of the touchdowns that you would have expected to see. And when you look at it from that aspect, he had five different targets inside the 5 zone. So again, highly valuable targets in there where he and Kyler just weren't able to connect. But you're singing, it's a little different tune if he comes down with half of those balls in the red zone there, in the 5 zone there, and propels him up into easily into wide receiver 3 territory last year. And where he's coming off the board right now, he's coming off the board wide receiver 90. Like, you're darn near in the undrafted territory, pick 261 overall. Like, this isn't one of those that you need to go out and draft AJ Green. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there are spaces where you're going to be able to pick the matchups and play those. And he's going to be a strong waiver wire contender, especially on some of these weeks where you may not have DeAndre Hopkins, things like that. And you can play some of the matchup here and there. But I think he will absolutely return value. I don't know that there's any reason that you don't see him sneak up into wide receiver 4, potentially wide receiver 3 territory when it's all said and done. But if you drafted a guy 90th overall and he finishes, wide receiver 4, like that's a good draft pick that's a good value returned on that thing. If you pick up a guy off the waiver wire, which is ultimately probably where you'll be, and he finishes in there as well, like, that meant that he gave you a couple of weeks here and there that you could have spot started him and been all right. And I think that's about what you're going to be looking at there as a potential spot start and matchup dependent type of wide receiver there. Let's go ahead and head on into Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore finished wide receiver 70 last year, 54 receptions, 64 targets, 435 yards, 1 touchdown, 11.23% target share. Thoughts on Rondale Moore?
I felt like Kingsbury never quite figured out how to use Rondale Moore, which is kind of odd given the offensive mind that Kingsbury is. So I think he finishes better than wide receiver 70. It wouldn't surprise me to see him finish higher than AJ Green by the time it's all said and done with, and let kind of youth take over. But I'm not drafting him. I'm going to let someone else have that project. I'm going to sit back and wait. I might keep an eye on him just to see if he maybe goes undrafted in short bench leagues, maybe medium or standard size leagues. He's probably not going to get drafted in those. So you keep an eye on him. You see what his usage rates truly are going to look like. But in the draft, I am not going after Rondale Moore. I have not seen any proof that Kingsbury knows how to use him. Because at 5'9", he's not your standard wide receiver, right? He needs to be a little bit more gimmicky. You need to make sure you have really good slot combinations to get him open and away from some of these linebackers. Because if he catches one in the middle, these linebackers are all bigger than he is. He's going to get his head blown off. So you do have to be a little bit careful with that. But like I said, I'll put a little star and keep an eye on, but I'm not drafting him.
Yeah, it's a no from me as well. I think when everybody is back, he gets kind of lost in the progression.
Yeah, you summed that up very well, right? He gets lost in the progression there. He came out and flashed very early last year, and then to use the same phrase, got seemingly lost in the progression of the season there, and never really brought that back to him. He had an extremely high catch rate, but he was catching the ball just barely off the line of scrimmage last year. And to that point, he's got to kind of be that water bug and work the angles, work some of those pockets there. And again, I don't know that I think, especially once DeAndre comes back, I think he is a little bit of the forgotten guy here and the guy kind of left out. So I'm not going to be taking Rondale Moore, even with his 66 wide receiver off the board type of draft capital there. There's many other options that I'd rather go. Alex Pierce is a guy going as the wide receiver 67 off the board, just a couple of picks after that. And I would much rather go with an Alex Pierce and the upside than Rondale Moore. So that's kind of where I'd look and go. Let's go ahead and head into the tight end room here. Zach Ertz finished tight end number 5 last year, 74 receptions, 112 targets, 763 yards, 5 touchdowns, 19.65% of the target share in a split last year between Philly and Arizona. Thoughts on Zach Ertz?
I like Ertz in redraft leagues this year. I thought his usage rate in Arizona was very good. Now, part of it was because of the DeAndre Hopkins injury. So you might get a really good first half of the season out of Zach Ertz, which isn't a bad thing because in a lot of situations, depending on how you want to do this, you could draft him almost as your second tight end, get some run for the first few weeks of the season, and then try and trade him for a position of need. So there's some gamesmanship around this Zach Ertz pick, but let me not get ahead of myself. I think the target share percentage will stay about the same. I do think he'll see somewhere in that 19 to 20% of the targets while DeAndre Hopkins is out. And because of that, he is a great tight end to use the first part of the season. But I think you need a secondary tight end or be able or willing to play the waiver wire for the back half, because I think that will kind of deteriorate as the season goes on. But he's a guy I'm looking at. If I'm waiting on tight end and I'm kind of, just filling up on skill positions and doing some other things, I'm perfectly fine with drafting Zach Ertz to start the season. I feel comfortable with that. I like the offense that he's in. Him and Kyler had an instant rapport as that security blanket for him. The touchdowns were there. I mean, 5 doesn't seem like a big number, but we're not talking about Gronk here, right? Or Travis Kelce. Like 5's a pretty decent number for the average tight end. And if you're getting tight end 5, hell, even tight end 8 type numbers for a guy that you're drafting that late, it's nothing but upside from right there. So I like Zach Ertz, and he's a guy I'm looking after.
And to your point on the 5 touchdowns, the year that he went bananas in 2018 with Philly, and he had over 1,100 yards receiving and over 100 receptions, still only had 8 touchdowns. I mean, like, that's just to your point. Like, that was his best statistical year, and he had 8 touchdowns. He's much more in that 4 to 6 range. That's kind of where he has hovered his entire career. And I think, part of it for me is that I'm judging him based off of what I know he can be, which is that 2018 year. And that's not fair, because that is an anomaly in terms of what he has done throughout his career. So I like it too. I like Zach Ertz. I was obviously a big fan of his when he was in Philadelphia, because he made Carson Wentz a heck of a lot better, just because he was that security blanket there. And so that helped me out a lot with my teams early on in Carson Wentz's career. But I like Zach Ertz too. And if you're going to wait on tight end, he's definitely at the top of the list of that, next tier of tight end.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy that, potentially could even be in that 4th run of tight ends when they come off the board, right? He's coming off the board in the 9th round there, tight end number 10 overall. And I think he will return value on you for you on that one, right? Like, I don't see him finishing really below about tight end 7, tight end 8 this year. So you'll get a couple of positional bumps there, I do believe. And if you're talking a 9th round pick, he can be a set it and forget it kind of tight end there for you. He will absolutely return value. He's got a middling schedule, or middling strength of schedule this year. So matchup wise, he actually has easier matchups than most of the wide receiving options out there in Arizona. So there is something to be said about that one. If the wide receivers are being jammed and having issues there, Kyler's not afraid to look at this guy and pepper him with targets and put 100+ targets on this tight end. And we've seen this year in, year out, when Zach Ertz gets 100+ targets, he does very well for you on fantasy. So Zach Ertz is an absolute, I'm in on that one, and like the value that you can get on that one. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and head to the rookie, Trey McBride, the rookie drafted in the 2nd round, pick 55 from Colorado State. Thoughts on Trey McBride?
I've gotten a good amount of Trey McBride in rookie drafts through Dynasty this year. I like where he's falling. In the beginning, it was really hot to trot, like it was mid-second round, and now it's kind of falling into the third a little bit, which I like even more. So, a bit unpolished as a route runner, but I think working with Zach Ertz will help him with that as he's able to pick the veteran's brain, and they're going through camp and all this stuff together. So I do think that helps him. I don't expect immediate output this season, right? Like I think we might see a couple flashes, but overall for redraft leagues, I'm not drafting him. I am keeping an eye on him, especially if I'm an Ertz owner, because if Zach Ertz goes down, then he becomes fantasy relevant. But as things sit, and since we can't predict injury, nor do we want to, I'm going to let Trey McBride sit for this year in redraft leagues, but I am grabbing him in dynasty leagues and rookie dynasty drafts.
So Zach Ertz might be his own worst enemy when it comes to bringing along the young tight end, because we've seen this story play out before in Philadelphia with the kind of the raw talent tight end that needed some polishing. Big bodied frame, could catch, but still needed to learn how to be an NFL tight end. And that was good enough to get Zach Ertz, traded to Arizona because he brought Dallas Goedert along so well. And that's kind of how I see things with Trey McBride. Now, do I think it's the same thing where Zach Ertz gets run out of town? I don't think so, because I don't know that Zach Ertz has another team left in him that would be willing to take that on. But I like the idea that Trey McBride gets to learn from Zach Ertz. And so I agree with you, Kevin. For this year, not so much, but for following seasons, I like him a lot.
Yeah. I go ahead.
I was just going to say, funny enough, you say that because I do have a lot of Dallas Goedert and Trey McBride combos. Like it just kind of how it fell on a lot of different dynasty teams. I have that combo quite a bit. So it's the Zach Ertz tree of youthful tight ends.
The proteges.
There you go. I'm in on what you guys just said there, right? Like Trey McBride, we've said it more than once on this show that tight ends typically take 2 to 3 years to fully develop into fantasy options and usable fantasy options out there. Zach Ertz signed a 3-year contract with the Cardinals to keep him in Arizona for 3 years. So I don't see him necessarily going anywhere. And I think that this is Zach Ertz will run that contract out. Trey McBride will pick that up and run with that once that contract's starting to play out there. So Trey McBride's not a guy that I'm drafting for redraft. To Kevin's point, he had been slipping down draft boards. And when I kept seeing him in the third round, it was an immediate smash yes draft button. So think that he's got a bright future ahead of him, just not this year for redraft.
How much does the one of us factor play into when you're drafting a guy like Trey McBride? I know we're very analytical here, but the one of us factor has to play in just a little bit, right?
No, I don't watch CSU football.
Yeah, but he was born in Greeley, went to
he wasn't. He was
Fort Morgan.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, he was born in Greeley, but he went to high school in Fort Morgan. And obviously, Derek, with where you are, that is not one of us.
Right.
But no, it's not. It'd be no different than us pounding the table for Austin Eckler, right? He went to Eaton right up the road.
Sure.
Like
went to Western State.
Yeah, we don't pound the table for Eckler that way, and he's just as close in proximity, if not closer, at least for high school ball, than Trey McBride is. So I like the kid. He has a lot of talent, but I'm always weary of drafting these kids who don't play in Power 5 conferences. And yes, they're great athletes. And yes, there's a number of them that have become great pros. But I do have to pay extra special attention to their tape and really understand what I'm looking at, because the level of competition is so far different that Trey McBride can look great against Nevada, but that doesn't mean he's going to look great against Las Vegas. And that's kind of, where you have to figure some of that out.
how fortuitous you are that they moved that team so that you could make that metaphor work there.
There we go. They did it just for that. They knew that Kevin was going to make that reference somewhere down the road. So there we go. All righty. Let's go ahead and head into the quarterbacks. Kyler Murray finished QB9 last year, 333 completions, 481 attempts, 69.2% completion percentage, 3,787 yards, 24 TDs, 10 interceptions, 88 rush attempts, 423 yards, and 5 rushing TDs. Thoughts on Kyler Murray?
Before we get to Kevin's breakdown on this, because he's going to have a lot of really good things to say, and it will be really analytical. Here's what I need out of Kyler Murray next year. I need him to be a world beater because I have leveraged. I have sold the farm and invested it in Kyler Murray shares in the home league. Made a move last year that was probably not one of my better ones, but it was a desperate move, and I don't think it set me up well for the future, trading away a lot of draft picks to get Kyler Murray. And it was one that I thought would help me make a playoff run, and then it didn't. But let me tell you, as somebody who has, hedged his bets in Kyler Murray, I was a little nervous when this whole scrubbing of the Instagram thing happened, the whole spit and spat over the contract that was going on, which is still kind of going on, I guess. I was a little nervous because I definitely hedged my bets on this. And now it looks like Kyler's going to be the week 1 starter there in Arizona, as if there was really any doubt to that. But I need Kyler Murray to be a world beater this year. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. Go ahead, Kevin.
I think we can see that happen, right? Like he had three weeks last year where he finished his QB1 on the week, right? And then 3 additional weeks where he finished his QB6. So just outside the top 5. So we see the ceiling. Like Kyler can do this, and sorry guys, I'm up in a dynasty league here. All right, back to Kyler. Sorry, Kyler.
Wait, are you drafting right now?
Yeah,
Always on the clock.
Of course,
always, man.
Always on the clock.
That should be the next segment that we have, or that's the summer segment. Always on the clock. That's what we got to call our summer segments.
So what scares me about Kyler is it felt like down the stretch, and specifically in that playoff game to the Rams, that they had him completely figured out. I'm interested to see what blueprint the rest of the NFL takes, because it's a copycat league, of that playoff game where Kyler played so poorly against the Rams, and if the rest of these teams are able to implement going forward, because he's going to see the Rams twice a season the way it is. Maybe that's part of it, right? That was the 3rd time that they've seen him. They kind of had a feel for him because realistically, where was it? He was QB 13 against the Rams 1 week. Where the heck's the other game? And QB 9. So he, in the regular season, he did very well, right? Like he did maybe a little subpar there at QB 13, but you're playing a tough defense in the Rams, and so you kind of expect a down week like that. But I'm hoping that he evolves. I'm hoping that Kingsbury keeps him evolving. Like realistically, I want to see Kyler over 4,000 yards passing. Like 3,700 yards, almost 3,800 yards, doesn't quite do it. A 24-10 ratio doesn't quite do it. Like I want to see him at like 28-8. Like that's where I want to see him at 41 to 4,300 yards, 28-8. The rushing yards can stay about the same. I don't need him running around. Yes, it's dynamic, and when he has to, he can. But I don't need him to force that. I want him to continue to develop as a quarterback and use these receivers. Hollywood Brown, use A.J. Green on some of these short routes. They have Rondale Moore for some of these gimmick plays. Zach Ertz underneath. Like, they have all these pieces that we just got done talking about. And I think Kyler can do that because we'll have to go back and check the tape. I think I picked Kyler to be the MVP at the beginning of the year last year. And I can't swear to that, but maybe we can go back and look later on. It's really irrelevant. But I think I did pick that at the beginning of the season. And through the first 8 weeks, I was feeling pretty good about it because the Cardinals were on a tear to start the season. Here we go. And then it was injury bye week, drama kind of get bogged down a little bit. And he finished the season okay, but not like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady did. So is he worthy of a top 5 pick at quarterback? Man, I think he's arguably number 5, right? Like that's the biggest problem with these with these fantasy drafts, is we know who the top 3 are, right? Everybody's saying it's Herbert and Mahomes and Josh Allen. And I'm perfectly fine with that 3. Really, however you want to spread it out. I'm not going to call you a liar. But then 4, 5, 6, and 7 is very interesting, right? You have Kyler, you have Joe Burrow, you have Lamar Jackson. Tom Brady is still here for redraft leagues, so he automatically gets kind of put up inside that top 10 no matter what. So my biggest fear with Kyler is, can you wait long enough to where there's some sort of value that you can get him at? Or is he just purely in that position, even in a single quarterback league, where you just have to go get your guy and hope that he can come in the clutch and perform for you? Ultimately, I think he finishes at 7 is kind of where I think I'm going to have him finishing up when we get everything kind of statted out and ranked out and all that good stuff. So it's about where he's going, but I'm not comfortable with taking him and having him there at 7. I feel like there's too much that can go wrong in Arizona to be overly confident with that.
So, yeah, there's a lot of different angles to take with one Mr. Kyler Murray here. From the simple standpoint, right? Like he's coming off the board QB6, and to your point there, that's probably about where he's going to finish, somewhere in that. Yeah, probably somewhere between about QB5, QB8. That's probably about where his range of outcomes is going to lie. You're talking 60th overall pick, so tail end of the 5th round there, which again, that's just kind of where you're going to have to take him if that's what you're going to be looking at there. And there's other guys that can certainly return value for you at the quarterback position, I think, that are going later than him. So kind of a mixed bag there as far as Alex goes, and going all in on Kyler this for the home league there. It makes sense in Alex's boat when you look at down the road. Not this year, but the following years on that one, where you get the starting quarterback that's young and will be able to do that this year, leveraging the farm. It's going to be a tough road for him to hoe there. But all of that to be said, Kyler Murray, when he had DeAndre Hopkins with him, he averaged about 6 points per game higher in fantasy output. So you've got to factor some of that in with DeAndre going to miss the first 6 games of the season there. The last tail end of the season when Kyler didn't have DeAndre Hopkins, averaging right about 18 to 19 points per game on those. With him, with DeAndre in the lineup, he was closer to 25 points per game. So drastic difference on the swing there. Also, Kyler missing 3 games in the middle due to some injury there as well. Didn't help anything. If he plays those games, you probably see him up over the 4,000 yard mark there. But there's going to be a hard test for Kyler here, who has an incredibly tough schedule, strength of schedule against quarterback. He is the second hardest strength of schedule against a quarterback this year heading into it. And you're talking QB6, so I'm probably not going to get much value back on that one from a draft position. 5th round capital. There's other guys that I'd probably rather go with the 5th round, talking single QB league there. That I'd rather go with there. And again, pains me to say that because we all know how high I've been on Kyler in the past. I just don't know that this year is going to be his year.
So with that, and Kyler being one of your guys, right, being a Sooner, my personal belief is, instead of taking Kyler in the 5th, I'd rather punt that position a round or two, take Jalen Hurts,
Right.
who has a higher ceiling from where he's being drafted, right? Your ROI, your rate of return for Jalen Hurts gives you the advantage to have some surplus as opposed to drafting him kind of right where you think he's going to finish.
Right.
And you get a round and a half discount basically by playing that type of situation, so you can fill up with another skill position receiver, right? Maybe not David Montgomery, but you can get you can get a second running back, or you can get your third running back or your third wide receiver, depending on how your draft's breaking out. Or maybe if tight end's slipping a little bit, maybe you're able to get one of those top 3 or 4 tight ends right there and go 2-1-2 and then grab quarterback. Like, there's a lot of different things that you can do. But I think I like my options better by doing it that way and taking Hurts in the beginning of the 7th round as opposed to taking Kyler in the 5th.
Yeah, and Hurts ranging anywhere from mid-6th to early 7th. So absolutely. And not only that, you look at Hurts' 3rd easiest strength of schedule against an opposing or for a quarterback, Kyler's 2nd hardest. Like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum there as well. So to that point, I'd rather go that route there. Any other thoughts here on Kyler or the Cardinals? All righty, let's go ahead and head right on in over to Buffalo. The Bills finished 11-6 last year, 59% pass, 41% run, ranked 3rd in points for, 5th in yards for. Head coach of Sean McDermott. Ken Dorsey's the offensive coordinator, with Brian Daboll heading to be the head coach of the Giants. We're going to start in the running back room. Devin Singletary finished running back 18 last year, 188 rush attempts, 870 yards, 7 TDs, 40 receptions, 50 targets, 228 yards, 1 touchdown. Thoughts on Devin Singletary?
Singletary, it was a weird season for Singletary, right? Like, we started the season, him and Zach Moss were kind of splitting the workload. It felt like Buffalo wanted Zach Moss to be the guy, and he couldn't quite take it. And then as the season went on, especially down the stretch and in through the playoffs, Devin Singletary became a beast for the Bills. That being said, I'm not necessarily buying a whole lot of that, but you can get Devin Singletary late enough that you're able to take a flyer there if you're kind of in a good position on running backs and you're taking someone who you would fill in. He's not your every week starter. He's a guy that would fill in, maybe dinged up on an injury to help skate you by. Maybe it's a bye week, something like that. So I think there's opportunity there. I think the Bills understand that they want to be able to be a little bit more balanced. I think a lot of that is to try and keep Josh Allen from running so much, and we'll talk about that as we progress on. But I think you could see a little bit of return on Devin Singletary. Like, I don't know that he's going to jump all the way up. He's not going to be a running back 1, right? He's not RB1. Is it possible he finishes mid to late RB2? I do think there's some possibility there, but realistically, I think you're probably looking somewhere in that 30 range is kind of where you're seeing Devin Singletary, right? Like, it's going to be an RBBC. A couple other guys that we're going to talk about here shortly to kind of explain why we think that, but he is going to have some weeks. He's a sneaky best ball play that you can get super late in best ball drafts and kind of capitalize on those weeks where he does see, 15 touches for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then tacks on 3 receptions. Like, I mean, it's possible. We saw it at the tail end of last year, but again, he's a guy you probably want to target if you're going 0 RB for depth, right? Like, not that he's going to anchor your RB position, but a depth piece if you go a true 0 RB format in drafting. Singletary is probably one of those guys that you're going to be looking at to help fill in, to at least have a safe-ish floor on guys that you're going to be rotating in and out in that strategy.
He was so frustrating last year. Man, was he frustrating last year. And of course, I didn't do myself any favors by having Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, because for some strange way I ended up with both of them on my roster, and trying to figure out which one was going to be the one each week was just a nightmare. Um, but like you said, Kevin, he did kind of turn it around there at the end of the season. Um, well, unfortunately, just did me no good in fantasy. But um, yeah, I because of what that comment that you said there, Kevin, about RBBC and how we think that this is going to be, there really won't be a true number one. Like I'm avoiding it. All of my draft strategies, which obviously one of them is going to have to change given the fact that I have no picks in the first 5 rounds of our home league draft. I'm going to have to get creative. But
it's okay. You got Kyler Murray.
I have Kyler Murray and I've got
Trey Lance.
For what that's worth. But I will say that in any of my traditional draft strategies, he is depth only. He is not somebody that I am targeting. It just so happens if he's around where I'm picking at that point, I'd consider it.
2-1 says he ends up on your team again this year in the home league.
It's probably going to happen. I'm going to hate myself. I mean, I already do, but it's going to happen.
So as interesting as it is to sit here and say, Devin Singletary was a league winner for a lot of folks last year.
Him and Rashad Penny, right? Between the two of them, they
running
were
back 1 and 2 over the playoff weeks. So weeks 15 through 17, Devin Singletary finished as the second most points at the running back position in half point PPR scoring. So like the dude showed up at the right time there. Right now, James Cook, they went out and invested early draft capital on James Cook there during the NFL draft there. So there's something to be said on that one. But I do think that you're going to see Devin Singletary take the lead role in this running back by committee when it's all said and done. And on the weeks where he gets 15 plus rush attempts, does very well for you and does very well for your fantasy roster. The weeks that he didn't, not so much, right? But I do think that you're going to see some of that play out to the point where you're going to probably see him get somewhere, 15 to 18 kind of rush attempts per game basis there. I think you'll see James Cook definitely take more of the passing down work on this one. James Cook being the much better receiving back out of the backfield there as well. So Devin Singletary coming off the board at running back 29 overall. You do have to spend a kind of a mid-round pick there for Devin Singletary with the 79th overall pick. So that puts him, that puts him definitely there in the mid rounds there. And I think he can return value there. I think that you're going to be looking a fringe running back too when it's all said and done, probably somewhere right around running back 25, 26 when it's all said and done. And to Kevin's point, could be a guy that could certainly put some value on your roster if you're going with the 0 RB approach there. All righty, let's go ahead and head right on into the rookie here. James Cook, drafted in the second round, pick 63 from the University of Georgia. Thoughts on James Cook?
I'm going to be interested to see how much they're actually willing to throw him the ball. Right, he doesn't have a whole lot of wear and tear on him. His usage was always spread out at Georgia. He can play between the tackles. He is electric with the ball in his hands. Georgia did a pretty decent job of kind of spreading him up all over the field. Like he'd go out wide, he'd line up in the slot every once in a while. They'd do some different things with swing passes out of the backfield for him. So he's very active in the passing game, arguably the best hands of any running back in this draft class as far as catching out of the backfield. He can pass pro fairly well, not exceptionally well, but fairly well, especially coming from that pro-style offense out of Georgia. So I am going to be interested to see his usage because Singletary and Zach Moss didn't catch a whole lot of balls out of the backfield. So I'm interested. I want to see where this fits in. Right. I think everybody does, but he does have a lot of talent. Quite frankly, he's already better than Zach Moss. And within a year's time, he could absolutely kind of push Devin Singletary out of the way. And we could see a guy who it's maybe an unconventional 3-down back type role, just because that's not how his body's built up. But if Buffalo's just going to continue to chuck it around the yard, I mean, you can play a conventional 3-down role in Buffalo and live off of, 15 to 18 touches a game and be extremely serviceable at running back.
Kind of that Alvin Kamara type workload almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There's no question that Alvin Kamara is the alpha in New Orleans, but he doesn't see 20 to 25 touches a game. He sees 17 to maybe 22. And that's kind of his cap, but they're extremely meaningful and productive touches. And so if James Cook can mimic that, hell, you're getting a steal. But he is absolutely a guy that should be drafted in all draft formats. And is at least worth the flyer to see what they're going to do in Buffalo, because that offense put, again, 3rd in points scored, as Derek mentioned earlier. It's worth having the piece and to see what you can get out of it.
I like that. Again, I to me, it is going to be imperative to figure out how they see him fitting in there. I think I'm just so spurned by Buffalo running backs from last. It was such a traumatic experience from last year, and I know that James Cook had nothing to do with it, but I will defer. And I guess he is worth the flyer, but not for me.
Yeah, I'm willing to take a shot on that one. He's a 10th round pick right now, the 42nd running back off the board there. And actually, it wouldn't surprise me with the way that Buffalo has kind of constructed this roster and how we're looking at this thing. It's not going to surprise me to see James Cook potentially line up in the slot a fair bit on some of these things. And you see him, running routes out of the slot on this one to the point where, he could potentially see, 3, 4, 5 targets a game, just in that role there. So, couple that with some backfield work, couple that I think he can return value for you on running back 42. Do I think he's going to get into RB1? No. RB2? Probably not. But I think you probably see him, somewhere in that RB3 territory type of thing there again, right? I think that you'll see Devin Singletary get the bulk of the workload. I do think that James Cook provides you some value and, potentially a bigger role than what we're thinking of from a passing work perspective. The guy that potentially is going to be lining out of the slot as it is now, I'm not a big necessarily believer in, and I do think that James Cook can fit that role better than the wide receiver 3 on this roster as it sits there. Let's go ahead and head on over into the wide receiver room. Alex, I'll do everybody a favor for you and just say that we'll, don't draft Zach Moss. So fair enough. Let's go ahead and head straight into.
Where were you last year?
I was right next to you going, why'd you draft Zach Moss? All righty. Anyway, moving on into Stefon Diggs, wide receiver number 7 last year, 103 receptions, 164 targets, 1,225 yards, 10 touchdowns, 26.34 or 37% of the target share. Thoughts on Stefon Diggs?
Smash yes. At 26.3% of the target share, you figure he's going to come down with a few more of those targets. What was it? 163 was the amount of targets.
Yep.
You figure he's coming down with more than just 103 of those this coming year, right? They did do some things differently against Diggs that took Allen a little bit to kind of learn from and get going. But I do expect Diggs to bounce back to a good blend between 2020 and 2021. So I have no problem drafting Stefon Diggs. I think that he is absolutely a top 10 wide receiver, top 7, yes, and you could argue a top 5, right? All these things. So I like the rapport. I love the target share that he gets in Buffalo. I really don't see any reason that that's going to change a whole heck of a lot, no matter who they bring in. So again, high profile offense. They pass the ball a good amount. Alpha wide receiver with a massive target share. There's nothing there to not smash yes about.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Like, he is one of those guys that when you're up and he is, obviously the best player available, just go with it. Just smash yes, move on.
Yeah, agreed, right? Coming off the board, wide receiver number 5. He's that turn pick in most drafts where you're picking him at the last pick of the first pick of the second type of range there. And absolutely think that he's going to, provide that for you. His time with Josh Allen has seen him get 160 targets a year. I don't think that that's going to fall off at all this way. So again, right, you talk about talent meets situation equals a good fantasy output and production, and that's what we have here. So, yep, I don't have any objections to drafting Stefon Diggs where he's coming off the board there. Let's go ahead and move on over to Gabriel Davis, who was wide receiver 52 last year, 35 receptions, 63 targets, 549 yards through the air, 6 TDs, 10.13% of the target share. Thoughts on Gabriel Davis?
Be careful about buying into the hype, right? I like Gabe Davis. I love the performance that he put up, right, to kind of finish the year last year. But don't understand what he is to this offense and where you need to draft him accordingly. Yes, targets are vacated because Manny Sanders left. And yes, Cole Beasley left. So there's targets that are vacated there. But a lot of those targets, I think, are going to go to the next guy we're talking about and not necessarily Gabriel Davis. So he is a great guy for best ball. He's going to be a boom bust wide receiver, right? And so you just have to be aware of that as you're drafting him. He is not going to be the Mr. Consistent where he sees 6 to 8 targets a game, 65 to 85 yards a game and a half a touchdown, right? Like, he's not that guy. Some weeks he's going to have 50 yards. There's going to be a couple weeks where, yes, he's going to have 120 yards and 2 touchdowns off of 6 receptions, and you're going, oh my God, this is great. It's not consistent. Be careful.
It's funny that you say he's not consistent because in his 2 years in the league, he's had 35 catches. He's had 62 and 63 targets. He's had 599 yards, 549 yards, 7 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns. Those are his 2 years in the league. So
weekly consistent.
But I'm talking, yes.
And that's
seasonally, yes, you're right.
Yeah, and so that's the point that I'm making there is that week to week, it is a roller coaster. But at the end of the year, 35 catches, 6-7 touchdowns, 550 yards. Like, that's what he is. And it's going to be a roller coaster ride to get to that, but that's what he is.
Do you know how crazy it is to have 35 catches for 6 and 7 touchdowns in back-to-back seasons? Like, your touchdown percentage is through the freaking roof. Like,
it's a massive outlier,
right? Like, it is crazy. And you have to be able to balance that out in one way or another, either by more targets and more receptions, or your touchdowns massively drop. If you're only getting 35 targets, we only have 3 touchdowns. But to have 6 and 7 off of 35 is mind-blowingly stupid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And kind of further nail the point home of a roller coaster ride, had 1 week last year where he was a wide receiver 1 week where he was a wide receiver 2, 3 weeks as a wide receiver 3, and the rest of them was wide receiver 4 or worse. Like, great best ball type of deal where he can get you a week here or there. And I think that you will see some targets come up. You'll see some receptions go up, things like that. Like, he is the presumptive number 2 wide receiver option in this offense there. And you pair him up with a really good quarterback in a pass happy offense. I think all of those things will play out better, but this is a guy that struggled to see more than about 50 to 60% of the snap count through his first couple of years in the league there. Granted, I get that you had an aging Emmanuel Sanders, an aging Cole Beasley out there that he couldn't get ahead of on the depth chart there. But it looks like this will be his year to shine type of thing. Again, love him in a best ball format, but a cautionary tale, I do think, when you're looking at him for season long, coming off the board, wide receiver 30, 80th overall pick there. So again, you're talking seventh round type of capital there. And I think that that's probably pretty close to where you're going to see him finish, is somewhere in that upper to mid wide receiver 3 type of range there when it's all said and done. Let's go ahead and head on into Jamison Crowder, who finished wide receiver 67 last year, 51 receptions, 71 targets, 447 yards, 2 touchdowns, 12.26% target share with the Jets last year. Thoughts on Jamison Crowder?
I think I like Crowder a little bit more than I like Gabe Davis. He just seems... Cole Beasley 2 years ago, not as much last year because he got dinged up on all the COVID and the weird locker room stuff that was going on there, made it kind of wonky. But a couple years ago, Beasley saw a ton of run coming out of the slot, right? And Jamison Crowder is a PPR monster. We saw that with the Jets. Now he has an even better quarterback situation. He gets to play opposite of Diggs, who will be the true alpha. So Crowder doesn't have to be. He just seems to find a way to get open, right? Like he's a little bit more youthful, has a bit more spring in his step than Emmanuel Sanders, probably a little bit more well-rounded and polished than Cole Beasley. So I expect his numbers to come up, and it wouldn't surprise me to have him finish inside of wide receiver 3 territory. So with where you're drafting him, that's a massive, massive value. So he's a guy that I'm absolutely keeping an eye on. I have him starred in a lot of different leagues just so we get deeper in drafts to make sure I don't forget about him. That I don't forget about him, that I get a piece of him here and there. Am I willing to, say that this is my sleeper for the year? No, I'm not willing to say that just yet. But he does enough things right, and he's playing with a quarterback who is far greater than anything he's ever had as a professional. I do think you see his numbers tick up, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him finish wide receiver, 32 on the year.
I mean, last year was one of his, worst years. And he seems to have, bad year. And then the next year with the new team seems to be really good. That's been, so far as last year with Washington was pretty bad. Of course, he didn't play in, he only played 9 games. But then his first year in New York, pretty good. 122 targets, 6 touchdowns. Last year, he was the victim of a rookie quarterback learning the NFL. And I think that is not a reason to think that he is anything less. I just think that, wide receivers, I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. You're only as good as the guy throwing you the football. And the guy throwing him the football last year wasn't very good. So massive improvement at quarterback coming over to Buffalo. I like him too. He's definitely somebody that I am going to be tracking to make sure that, if I've got the opportunity to pick him up where he's going, I think he's worth it.
Yeah, when he's coming off the board as wide receiver 71, 198th overall, like I only see upside on this one here, right? Like you've got very late draft capital that you're going to be having to put up in order to roster Jamison Crowder there, to the point where he'll be undrafted in a lot of leagues there. So definitely worth keeping an eye on. And you're right, Kevin. I think he can kind of fulfill some of that Cole Beasley role that we've seen in the past there. And if he does, similar things to that, where, he catches 70 balls and gets, 600-700 yards and a handful of touchdowns, he will drastically outperform that wide receiver 71 draft capital on that one. So again, I think he's a guy that will return value and is a guy that is worth keeping an eye on, especially in deeper leagues there. Go ahead and head on into the tight end room. Dawson Knox finished tight end 8, 49 receptions, 71 targets, 587 yards, 9 touchdowns, 11.41% of the target share. Thoughts on Dawson Knox?
I like Dawson Knox. I like that he is one of those, not in that top tier, right? He's not going in those top 3 or 4 tight ends. Very similar to Zach Ertz, right? In terms of where he's going and where he's going to finish. I liked his consistency last year. I know he dealt with the hand injury late, and that was a little unnerving because I had him in a couple leagues and was kind of relying on him, but. I was able to actually grab him. He was cast away, I believe. Somebody had dropped him, and I was able to snag him up on free agency in the home league. So I like Dawson Knox. I feel like if he can be, if he can mimic what he did last year, that's gravy. That's gravy to me. I think he has shown that he's got a rapport with Allen, with Josh Allen. I just think he is of that second tier, a good tight end to have.
Another guy I'm really interested to watch this year. Try and figure out if he is the touchdown monster that he kind of was last year with nine receiving touchdowns. It is a big number, right? Even with the broken hand, came through. Did see consistent usage each week, like you were consistently seeing 4 to 6 targets. A couple monster weeks where he had 10 and 9. Those are always nice to see too. My biggest thing is his points are touchdown dependent, right? There were a lot of games where you saw him with 17, 25, 17, 14, 38, 11. Like those were his yardage totals. So without those touchdowns, it is kind of a boomer bust play at tight end. So I am a little weary of that. Maybe it's one of those situations where Allen feels more confident with him this year, and with bringing in Crowder and doing some different things at the wide receiver position, maybe they use him a little bit more, kind of down the field, stretch it a little bit, get his yards per catch up to kind of help offset the regression in touchdowns that surely is coming, right? Like I just can't peg him for 9 touchdowns again this year. I think 5 or 6 is probably where the golden ticket lies. Even with this high profile offense, there's just a number of different areas where you could see them going, and it's hard to bank on Dawson Knox receiving every single opportunity that he did last year. So I like him, but I'm going to have an insurance policy with it because I do think that you're probably drafting him at his ceiling right now. And you need to be careful of that because that's where a lot of frustrations and setbacks come if you're not prepared to, again, play Russian roulette with tight end week in and week out on the waiver wire, or just keeping them on your roster and trying to pick the matchup.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I was just going to say that, I see him as a touchdown to dependent tight end there as well. This is a guy that I'm going to proceed with caution on, right? Like, again, he was a big body kind of guy that Josh Allen would look for when they got into the red zone there a little bit. But for the most part, his touchdowns came really on longer touchdowns to it. He only had 2 touchdowns inside the 5 zone there, 4 touchdowns inside the 10 zone there. So, more than a half of his touchdowns came on more than 10-yard type of plays there. So it's not necessarily the guy that when they get down in there and they're inside the 5 zone, they're inside those very valuable red zone type of targets, is the guy that Josh Allen's really looking towards on this one. And I think there's better value down the board there a little bit, right? Zach Ertz coming off the board at tight end 10, almost a round later. I'd rather go that route. Mike Gesicki coming off the board at tight end 11, almost 2 rounds later. I would rather go that route there than going with the Dawson Knox here. I see a big bust potential, hanging around this one here. So, Dawson Knox, the guy I will not be drafting. Let's go ahead and head on into Josh Allen in the quarterback room. Josh Allen finished QB1 last year, 409 completions, 646 completion or attempts, 63.3% completion percentage, 4,407 yards, 36 TDs, 15 interceptions, 122 rush attempts, 763 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Thoughts on Josh Allen?
Like I mentioned earlier, he's one of the top 3 tight ends, right? It's Allen, Herbert, and Pat Mahomes kind of jockeying for that first QB1 position. I like Allen. I like the fact that he uses his legs. I wish his completion percentage was a little bit higher. Like, I still want him to keep working on that and see if we can get up closer to that 66, 67%. I also want to see his interceptions come down just a smidge, like 15, almost 1 a game. Like, I'd really like to see that drop down to kind of 12 or 11 and limit some of those turnovers. But that being said, if you are a player who likes to grab quarterback early, or if you're in a super flex and you're kind of forced to grab quarterback early, if you can get your hands on Josh Allen, smash yes and walk away. Like, you know he's going to go in the top 3 for quarterbacks. There's a pretty good chance that the return on investment is about even. But what you get with that is a pretty safe floor with Josh Allen too, because of him being so mobile and the Bills offense having enough weapons that they can get up and down the field pretty well on people.
Yes. Yes to all of that. I think that Josh Allen is going to have – I think that he's up there in the MVP conversation again this year. I have no reason to think that, he tails off any. They've added pieces around him. I think the running game, will be better, and that will take some of the pressure off of him to run the football. As you said, Kevin, the completion percentage, that does need to get a little higher in order for the MVP season to come to fruition. But if he does what he has shown consistently over the last 2 seasons, there's no problem with Josh Allen. Like, he will be a fantasy, I don't want to say darling, because we all know that who he is, but you will love having him on your team because he will be consistent. He will be one of those guys that could carry your team and help shoulder the load. If guys have off weeks, that you can just set it and forget it with Josh Allen.
Yeah, absolutely. You can just set it and forget it, right? He's coming off the board as QB1. In a single QB league, you're looking at him being the 22nd overall pick there. So you're talking late 2nd round type of draft capital there. And even with some of the guys that are going around him, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to taking quarterback, even in a single QB league with Josh Allen there, right? Like, QB1's a hard thing to try and repeat, and he's done it 2 years in a row here. And I think you could see him return QB1 for a 3rd year here in a row. Like, there's lots of really good things to look at Josh Allen, right? He's got a lot of really great weapons around him. He's in an offense that likes to throw the ball. Very comfortable with the offense there. It's not often that you actually see a quarterback play better on the road than he does necessarily at home, which was the case last year. Last year in the home games, he was at 22.7% or 22.7 points per game in half-point PPR scoring. On the road, he was 8 points a game higher. So again, not one of those things that you typically see. You typically see the inverse where guys play better at home, not necessarily on the road. I think Josh Allen does some very positive things for you. It should probably be the first quarterback off the board in, especially super flex, and even in redraft leagues. I would certainly look at going that route there. Any other thoughts on Josh Allen or the Buffalo Bills? All righty. Well, guys, it's going to take us down here to the end of it. Any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Continue to stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of news heading everyone's way, right? As camp unfolds, as camp unfolds and players continue to show up, we get to see their workouts, all these open sessions that are being released to the media. Keep an eye on the beat writers. Don't always believe Twitter. Make sure you're verifying your sources. But now's the time where you kind of start putting your rankings together, right? Like, I like this guy over this guy. I like this situation more than this. So we will get into tons of that. We will help you through this draft season that's coming up and put you in the best possible position. Just stay tuned to the socials, the website, obviously our weekly show here, and we will continue to march you along and down the road to have success this fantasy season.
And of course, we'll have the poll question posted on Twitter of the most delusional fan base in the NFL. Make sure you're voting in on that one.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention that, Alex. That's actually what I'm typing out right now.
Oh, did I need to stall longer for you to do that? Sorry.
You could, yeah, either way, if you want to keep talking there, you go right on ahead.
As Kevin said, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, you'll just have to do that.
All right. Yes. So make sure that you're hitting up that poll question. That'll be going live any second now. So by the time you're, listening to this on replay, if you're hitting up the audio version on the podcast there, I appreciate you tuning in. If you're hitting the video version on the playback, whether that's on Twitch or YouTube or Twitter, appreciate you guys tuning in there. Make sure you're hitting up the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Good Old Boys FF. Kevin mentioned we have lots of stuff coming down the pike here. That'll be going up on the website. And again, one of the best ways to support this independent podcast is to hit up that YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button on the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast YouTube channel. But guys, that's going to do it for us. He's Kevin. He's Alex. I'm Derek. Y'all have a good one. Be safe.